Good evening. Welcome to St. Philip's. That glare there. We're very pleased to present Ronan Rooney and his history of St. Philip's. Ronan has a history that goes back to shortly after his birth when he was baptized here. And so he has continued his interest in the church and his interest in history. And so welcome. Glad to see you here. And his mother will tell you more about his details. Thank you for coming tonight.
My name is Alice Rooney, and I'm going to hit the record button so I can record this for posterity. Okay, there we go. Recording. Okay. Ronan went to high school, grew up here, went to high school here, graduated 20 years ago. He's here for a 20-year class reunion. Then he went off to college in Tacoma, Pacific Lutheran University, where he majored in history, psychology, and religion. And so two of those things are really going to be tied. Well, all three are going to be evident in his presentation tonight. When our kids go off, you never know quite what direction they're going to go in. And his discovering the joy of doing these podcasts has been amazing and it's been a real joy. And I hope that he talks about them some as he's talking today. So anyway, Ronan, take it away.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for the very kind introductions. Like they said, my name is Ronan Rooney. I was born at, I can now say, the old hospital in 1985. Wayne Davenport delivered me. So that's my Wrangell cred. I graduated high school in 2003. My 20-year reunion is just in a few days. I'm excited. I was raised in this church. But what you're hearing today is very much one man's opinion. This is me going through and getting the facts together and trying to weave a story. And I'm going to do it with some slides. And I'm hoping that I don't take any more than an hour of your time, because I know it's very busy right now. 4th of July season is on, and so we all have things we got to do, dishes to make. But we have some fun right now. We get to talk about some Wrangell history. My intention is that this might be the first of a series of presentations called History Where It Happened. A really remarkable thing about Wrangell is that you can still go step foot in a lot of places that were very important historically, and including St. Philip's. You are going to hear about this place in this place. So think about that. Other places in Wrangell where maybe there's some history you'd like to know about could be an interesting topic. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, St. Philip's, for hosting. I want to thank the Irene Engel Public Library for lending us this projector and this screen. It's just really terrific. I super appreciate it. And I want to thank the faith communities that we're going to be talking about today. You know, part of being raised in Wrangell is that I had the real privilege of spending a lot of great quality time in so many faith communities, inside the Presbyterian Church, inside St. Rose of Lima Catholic Church. I've been to the Latter-day Saints. I've been to the Assembly of God, Bible Baptist Church, Seventh-day Adventist. You know, I'm leaving some out, I know.
Yeah, you can go to the Lutheran Church anytime.
Oh yeah, the Lutheran. Well, I went to PLU, so you know, you can, that's right. You know, it's a very cool place to come and just feel part of this community. So I want to thank these groups that we're going to talk about. You know, they say in polite society, you shouldn't talk about religion and politics. And this is a presentation about church politics. And it's always a little tense, but it is a fact of life. And it shows congregations and groups of people using their power to change their world and control their own destiny. And I think the more you understand your own power, the more you can use it. And so that's what this is really about. I want to talk about the first American decade. That's really kind of kicks off in 1867, kind of through 1877 here in Wrangell. And then we're going to skip ahead a generation to the Klondike Gold Rush, which shows up at the end of the century, around 1898 to 1902. Why we're going to skip ahead is that, you know, to put it really bluntly, Wrangell's kind of quiet between the 1880s and 1890s. Wrangell's a lot of fun to talk about in the 1870s. The 1870s is Wrangell going through lots of drastic transformations. And the more you understand the 1870s, it really sets up for what happens during the Klondike Gold Rush and the formation of this church here. And then I'll spend a little bit of time at the end talking about the legacy of Reverend Harry Corser, who is involved in founding St. Philip's. And I'd be happy to take some of your questions at the end too. If I don't know, that's good. I should just say I don't know. It's quite possible someone here in the audience has the answer. The fun of doing history to a group of people who were actually around and heard from people who were there firsthand. It's a thrill for me. It also means that the power's out of my hands. And sometimes the truth comes to me this way. So I'm also a learner too. I'm a student. I really am enjoying the privilege of getting to address you today, but I know it's really my job to always be listening and learning and updating what I know. So get kicked off here. Let's talk about the first American decade, which kicks off in 1867 with the Treaty of Cession. The Treaty of Cession is the treaty signed between Russia and the United States. It's negotiated by William Henry Seward, who's sitting there at the table with a pen in his hand. He survives being stabbed in the face the same night that Abraham Lincoln is shot and killed. Seward goes on to negotiate this Treaty of Cession to purchase Russia's interests in Alaska. And what are Russia's interests in Alaska? It's a very small footprint. There's a few settlements. There's an abandoned settlement that's just here down where the Marine Bar is. There's a somewhat active settlement in Sitka, and the United States assumes control. Does anything change here in this community in 1867? Not really. What these men are doing in Washington doesn't really reverberate here. People are just living their lives here. It's a Klondike community, Kachkanak. Not a name that I was raised with. I don't think in my childhood did I ever hear the name of the village. And now in scholarship, it is everywhere. We're really bringing this understanding of that village back to life. So you got to understand 1867, this is a Klondike village wrapped along the Evelyn Harbor, and there's very few white settlers here. Now, 1868, this is when things start to change here in our community. 1868 is when the United States Army sends a crew of men out to establish a fort at the site of where the post office is today. And that's what these buildings become right here. The U.S. Army hires Klondike men at about $1 a day and a ration to construct all this. That includes chopping down trees, pulling stumps, draining the swampy, musky kind of land, and erecting these different buildings right here. This building up in the front, this is the officers' quarters. There's barracks back there. And then this tall two-story building that you see, this is the hospital building. It's 2 stories. It's got a beautiful balcony. It's the largest building of the fort. And you're going to hear about it a lot because as the largest of the dozen buildings in the fort, it is the building where kind of everything happens. All the major turning points in Wrangell's history happen inside that building, the biggest, nicest building of the fort. So through 1868, 1869, the fort is being constructed. And then I want to show you this just for some context. This is that picture, that postcard image from the past, dropped on top of a current photo of Wrangell today. So you probably won't recognize this. I mean, this is Post Office Hill. You know, this picture, the background was taken by a young man here in Wrangell named Killian Booker, who'd done a wonderful job photographing Wrangell for Google Maps. And as someone who has been away for a long time, I got so sentimental looking at those street photos. He picked some beautiful days to photograph the town. So this gives you an idea where the fort really was. So 1869, the fort is effectively done being constructed. But the turning point in 1869 comes at the very end. It's the bombardment of Wrangell, or it's also called the bombardment of Kachkanak. It is where the United States Army, after throwing a drunken party inside that 2-story hospital building that turns violent, fires cannons upon the village. And So I made this illustration of Wrangell to sort of indicate where things are happening. So here's my fort, and it shoots solid cannonballs at the village on December 26, 1869. Tlingit people with rifles come up into Mount Dewey and fire down inside the fort. And the very next day, the fort fires exploding shells at Shakes Island Clan House, which lead to effectively sort of a surrender. They agree to the Army's terms. It's a major turning point in the history of the community. It defines the relationship between the people who have lived in this village for generations and these new people who have come to establish the fort. And it's not great. In fact, it blows up in the Army's base. The commander, William Morrow, is recalled back to Sitka. And before 1870 is out, the US Army completely abandons the fort. They sell the fort, in fact, to a frontier pioneer named William King Lear. The fort cost the US government $26,000 to build at that time. And then they sell it to King Lear a year later for $600, which is a steal. So King Lear owns the fort by the end of 1870. And he goes by King Lear. That is his given name, is William King Lear, and he introduces himself as King Lear. Travelers come to Wrangell and they talk about meeting King Lear, who has all these forts in this frontier wild place. And King Lear operates them as a business. He rents out space for storage, he's got lodging, he's got the intention of making money on Wrangell. I think historically, King Lear is the first person to look at this community and say, how do I get people to come here and spend their money? I think he's really the first person to do that. And it's quiet, actually, because the Army has left and he's got the people in the Tlingit village that are his companions, the only people around, really. But things start changing with the Cassiar Gold Rush. Up the Stickeen River in the Cassiar district, gold is discovered in 1872. As people start trickling in by 1873, and by 1874, it's a full-on gold rush. There are people coming from British Columbia, they're coming from Oregon, they're coming over from Sitka. People are coming to this community, and they're coming and they're staying in King Lear's buildings. And this is what he's wanted all along. But it's kind of a lawless place. He turns the hospital building, where that party was, Christmas 1869, he turns it into a dance hall, also called a hurdy-gurdy house, because they play the hurdy-gurdy instrument, the hand crank. And he's got to be just thrilled. Finally, his investment of $600 is really paying off now. As King Lear is quoted as saying, "I only want to keep this place long enough to make $50,000 out of it in any and every way I can, and then it may go to the devil." So that's King Lear, a shrewd businessman, and he's just trying to cash in. Well, by this point, 1874, things are getting bad in Wrangell, and the Army, which is based out of Sitka, is fully aware of it. They're hearing reports that are shocking them. And so what happens in 1874, the Army comes and they take over. They raid the town, and we're talking a Carrie Nation style prohibition raid. Barrels are smashed up, bottles are broken on the beach, men are arrested and thrown into the fort as a jail, and the Army literally takes the fort back from King Lear. King Lear, of course, protests, saying, "I paid $600 for this, you sold it to me." And the Army says, "We're the Army. What are you going to do? We're going to pay you a little rent for taking it back." And so this absolutely changes the landscape of Wrangell again. The Army is back, King Lear is furious, but the Army has good reason to do it. As the commander of the Army in Alaska, Captain Joseph B. Campbell, wrote to his superiors, "I am now satisfied, the longer I am here, that Wrangell has been the center of much fraud and corruption and official inertness within the last year." So he really comes in and brings the hammer down, literally and figuratively, smashes up the liquor and trade and tries to bring control to this area. The dance hall days are over. That hospital building is now occupied by the United States Army. but they find it very difficult to enforce law in this community. And this happened in Sitka as well. They would try to shut down people doing the illicit trade or things they didn't like, and people could just go into the woods. That's Wrangell. You could just get on a small boat, go around the bend, and you're suddenly somewhere nobody knows where you are. Nobody can see you. The army has a really tough time trying to control this place. So what are they going to do? They occupy the fort. They try to settle disputes. There are people who wrote at the time, and historians subsequently, who say the army actually makes things worse because a lot of these soldiers, these young single men who wind up with time on their hands, they contribute to the debauchery that's going on here. Alcohol, sex, violence, it's happening, and nobody really knows how to get a handle on it. So that sets us up for the big turn. This is where things start getting spiritual. This is where we get to start talking about Christianity. We get to start talking about missionaries. So it's 1867, June 1st, 1867. A group of Ts'msyen men from what was then called Fort Simpson come up to Wrangell to go gold mining up in the Cassiar, but they stop in the community and they get a government contract from the fort to chop wood. And so this group of men chop wood, they make a little bit of money, but they also practice their Methodist beliefs of prayer, and they do it in public ways, and they're seen by people from the Klondike village. It's open worship in public, and they're so curious, these Klondike villagers, when they see this. What are you doing? What is this? Tell us about this. It's a genuine interest. It's an invitation that the Methodists accept. They say, we'll teach you about this. We'll show you what we're doing. And the leader of the Ts'msyen men is Philip McKay, or as his indigenous name is, Claw, C-L-A-H, Claw. When he was baptized and joined the Methodist faith, he took the name Philip McKay. So Philip McKay is the leader of this group, and he is what one scholar calls a spontaneous evangelist. Nobody saw this coming. Nobody planned it. McKay did not go to school to become a missionary. McKay did not join Methodism to become the person that would convert people. He literally came here just to chop wood and maybe find something on this Cassiar Gold Rush. So it's pretty extraordinary that this man is able to have this sort of influence. And here's a little story in his own words that he wrote to Reverend Crosby in British Columbia. In July, I went away to look for some salmon and stopped all night at a Stickeen camp. I read some out of the Bible, and the poor Stickeens thought, when they saw me pray, that some great monster was about to come up from the ground. So he's having open Bible, reading to these people that he's around, and it's powerful, it's impactful. They're really resonating with this. Again, he's a lay person. He's just a man who happens to be a Methodist and is being asked to tell about the Bible. And so he sends word down to British Columbia, down to Fort Simpson, to Reverend Thomas Crosby, who was then a very well-known, very powerful Methodist minister out of Fort Simpson. And Reverend Crosby hears there's a Ts'msyen Methodist man in this community that nobody seems to be able to control, who's got a congregation. He's running Sunday services, and he's doing school for children and some adults too. This is remarkable. So Reverend Crosby comes up here, and here's his story about that. I started on the journey of 160 miles with my canoe and got in tow of a small steamer going up. On arrival, I found many of the natives were converted and were attending services in the large heathen house belonging to Chief Toyat. So he gets here and he sees there's this congregation, and they've been invited into the home of a Tlingit elder. And I want to talk about that man, Toyat. No two sources spell his name the same way. So for me, I am always looking for him. He's kind of hard to find because his name, I can't just type it into Google and get all the answers. I have to look for him. He is one of my favorite people I've come across in Wrangell history. He's a really remarkable man. He is a Tlingit elder. He is a headman in his family. He is a carver as well. And he plays an important role in a number of stories that define this first American decade. We've got Talyat is part of the bombardment of Wrangell story. We know about the bombardment of Wrangell story from the Tlingit side, thanks to a man named William Tamery, who tells his story to the Wrangell Sentinel in 1940 and also on an audio tape. And he is quoted as saying to Chief Shakes, brother, our chief, they are a big dog. We are only a little dog. If we take a soldier and kill him, they will kill all the Wrangell people. Let them go, my brother. The sentiment of a peacemaker in this conflict, in the midst of cannons being shot at the village. He is a peacemaker. He is also responsible now for inviting the Ts'msyen Christians into his own home, which is remarkable. He is also the man that leads the expedition that takes John Muir in the canoe up into the Chilkat country. If you read John Muir's story about that voyage, Talyat is on every page. Talyat is in charge of it. Talyat gets sick of John Muir. John Muir rocks the boat every time they try to shoot a goose or something to eat. John Muir takes pity on the goose. Poor Talyat, his patience is tried by Muir. But Muir comes to absolutely love this man, such that shortly after John Muir leaves, there is a conflict in Wrangell, in the area where downtown is now, in which Talyat is shot and killed. And for everyone who was around for that moment, the death of Talyat is the worst thing. So we'll get to him, the Presbyterian minister S.L. Young, but he describes that day as the worst day of his life. Both he and Muir considered Talyat, they call him the old noble Roman. I mean, they just see him as a statesman. And so this is a big deal that Talyat has invited Claw into his home. Again, we've got two indigenous men making this happen. At this point, there's no European influence at this point. This is happening between them. So let's go back to 1867. Claw has this fledgling congregation. Reverend Crosby has come and seen it and gives his blessing and helps them raise some money. The Tlingit people in town throw together $100 in blankets to help pay for the creation of a church. And this is really remarkable. Reverend Crosby is just astounded by it. So shortly after Crosby visits, Philip Claw McKay's wife, Annie McKay, comes up here to Wrangell. And according to Reverend Crosby, we kept Philip McKay there teaching school and conducting services until the promised help should arrive. His wife Annie joined him soon after to help as well as she could. So this is pretty much got to be familiar to us. How often do we see somebody in a pastoral job and their spouse is also carrying a lot of the water, doing a lot of the work? And that's exactly what she is. She is his teammate in this effort. And that's her photo right there. I apologize, it's a little blurry. It's the only one I could find. So, 1876, this community, you've got this growing congregation, and you've got this couple that are in charge of it. And in 1877, the army leaves again. They abandon the fort once again. And they only leave a deputy collector of customs as the only government person in the whole community doing anything on behalf of Uncle Sam. So it's really incredible that Philip Claw McKay is kind of the only really good thing happening at this point. So 1877. So this is the year that the Presbyterians, they've heard about Philip Claw McKay and his congregation in this community, and they're very impressed by it. Some people say they heard about it from Reverend Crosby. Some people say they heard about it from a soldier in the fort who wrote a letter saying, please come help this community. They need it. So in August 1877, Amanda R. McFarland, you see her here on the left, comes to Wrangell with Reverend Sheldon Jackson. She has recently been widowed, and she happened to run into Jackson in Portland. And he says, hey, would you like to come to this place in Alaska and be a missionary? And he talks her into it. And 3 days later, he's gone. They're both here for 3 days, and then he leaves her to be with Claw and to minister to this congregation. And tragically, Claw becomes ill in the fall of 1877. He would cough up blood, and he would be bedridden for days and days and days at a time. And so this effort that he began, which is this congregation that he's been serving, she takes more of a role in organizing and leading and doing the things that need to be done. Different historians have written about this moment. It's been my observation that many scholars have described this relationship as, oh, once Amanda McFarland arrives, Claw is her assistant. And I think that's unfair, because he's been in Wrangell for about 1.5 years, and he started this. Just him with his personality, him talking about the Bible, him getting invited into the home of Tawyat. It's really incredible what he did. To reduce him to some sort of assistant, I feel like sort of deprives him of some of the really incredible accomplishments he made in very difficult circumstances to get Christianity started in the community. Tragically, December 27, 1877, Claw dies. He consumption or tuberculosis, he passes away. And it's very sad to read the accounts of this. Amanda McFarland writes many, many letters to Sheldon Jackson, other superiors in the Presbyterian Church back east. And about Claw's death, she described it. His wife was crouched down by the bed weeping. He turned to her and said, "Annie, you must not cry. Jesus knows what is best." His friends took his body to Fort Simpson to bury it. And so Amanda McFarland is effectively alone. The army is gone, Claw has died, and now it's up to her to minister to this congregation. And it's up to her to serve. And so one of the very first things she does is she takes the school started by Claw and run by Claw and creates the McFarland home. And look at these beautiful young girls here. I want to point out a few of them in this photograph. So here, number 11, that's Annie McKay, that's Claw's widow. And then here, right here, number 7 is Matilda Kinnan, who becomes Tilly Paul Tamarie. Her Tlingit name was Katliud. She also went by the name Kataha. She's standing right next to Annie McKay, and she takes a very important role translating for the Presbyterians, organizing the girls. And in this photo, you can see she's clearly the tallest person here, so she gets to be the boss. And she starts on her path to becoming one of Alaska's most famous missionaries. We'll definitely talk about her again. So 1878 is finally when Reverend S. Hall Young arrives. And some of the scholars who have written about, Wrangell history or more broadly Alaska history, to them, this is the moment it officially happens. This is the moment that there is now officially a church. And I really kind of want to say, well, look back to 1876, there's Claw, he's doing Sunday services, he's not ordained, but this is happening, the spontaneous evangelism is happening. S. Hall Young becomes very famous, and he writes a lot. He starts a newspaper here in town called The Glacier. Just by the volume of words that he's produced in print, he ensured that he would be famous forever. I enjoy reading his stuff, but he is quite fortunate to inherit the good work done by Claw and then Amanda McFarland, and then he shows up and he's just ready to jump in and take it over. So I do want to talk about St. Rose Lima too, because it's also kind of happening in the 1870s. Amanda McFarland is writing letters back east to Sheldon Jackson and her superiors, and she's writing things like, "I think the Catholics are coming. I'm hearing rumors that the Catholics might be coming." She's very alarmed by it. And they do come, and the Catholics do absolutely do come. St. Rose is the very first Catholic church in Alaska, which is a wonderful point of pride for our community. But by the time they found the church, it's the kind of at the end of the Cassiar Gold Rush boom. And you may have heard, Alaska, often economies are boom and bust, boom and bust. there was a boom for the Cassiar, and then by the end of it, there's a bust. And so by the time St. Rose is founded, the people are just not coming like they were a few years earlier. And many people have already subscribed to the Presbyterian mission. And so there's this wonderful book I'm going to show you right here. This wonderful book called St. Rose of Wrangell, which was written by Father Vincent A. Eiserman. I recommend everyone take a look at it. I wish every faith community in this town had something like this. It's a really enjoyable read. I've really enjoyed getting a lot of stuff in this. This talks about the founding of St. Rose of Lima. Quoting from Father Eiserman, but all the popularity and goodwill in the world did not succeed in attracting a multitude of converts to Althoff's log cabin church. The Indian chiefs had forgotten the promises they made Bishop Seegers when they begged him to send a priest to live among them. I mean, putting it sort of politely, the church is founded, there's physically a church, but because there's one priest in Alaska who's sort of supposed to travel around, the church doesn't really thrive in those decades. By the end of the century, it's effectively an abandoned building. It's not until I think around 1908, 1909 that a new church goes up, and then St. Rose is taken off, and then it's getting much bigger and much busier. I just want to point out that's happening in that era too. So what we have from this first American decade is we have the U.S. Army, hits and misses, they come and go, and then they come and go. They struggle to enforce any kind of justice, any kind of law. It's a very lawless place. And you've got Claw successfully starting Christianity in this community, which is not easy to do. Other people have not done this. There had been, religious figures who had come through and, maybe raised their hand and said spiritual things, but it's really Claw who gets the first converts. It's really Claw who is the sea change in this community. So now let's skip ahead. Skip ahead past the 1880s, 1890s. Things were happening in those decades. I'm going to skip ahead because I don't want to go too long. I don't want this to be a midnight mass. I just know that. I know that there's good things, but we get to this era, and this is where we get to start talking about the formation of this community. So here we are. This is the Presbyterian Church at the time. It looks a little different than what you see today. It's a little bit different shape. It's a beautiful church. You've got the Presbyterian Church, and you've got the manse next to it. And this is where people are coming during the Klondike Gold Rush. They're seeing this church, and they're joining this church. But what happens at this time is the church splits in two. It's two different congregations. You have all these newcomers coming here to Wrangell, all these people coming off steamships as part of the Klondike Gold Rush. Their intention is to go up the Stickeen River, go up to Dease Lake, go up even further and reach the Klondike. There are some scholars who think nobody made it to the Klondike from the Stickeen River. It was just so difficult. You literally had to get to Dease Lake and cut down trees, make boards, and build your own boat with nails that you begged, borrowed, or scrounged to get. I mean, it was not a great route, but still people come here, okay. And these newcomers come with their own ideas and beliefs, and they don't want to worship in the same church as native people. And so part of the Presbyterian congregation withdraws and forms what's called the Second Presbyterian Church. So the minister at the time was a guy named Clarence Thwing, and he just lets this kind of happen. And so the Presbyterian Church is riven in two. So 1899, a new pastor arrives inside the community to minister to the congregations, a man named Harry Prosper Corser. When he comes here that year, he's 35 years old. He's from Pennsylvania, lifelong Presbyterian. He's very well educated. He is a teacher of many years who went to law school. So he's a bona fide lawyer. And then after law school, he went back to teaching. And then you can just sense looking at his biography, he's just looking to fill some void in his life. He clearly likes to be among people. He likes to lead. He likes to speak. He's known for loving poetry. At his graduations, he gives speeches. He comes to this community and he finds the congregations in two. So he immediately gets into several disputes. I mean, just immediately. And nothing about Reverend Corser's life before coming here suggests that this was going to happen. Something happens when the band come here. He becomes involved in a dispute with a Juneau newspaper about the theory of evolution. Corser is in favor of it. The editor of the newspaper is not. And you've got Corser hosting African-American men in his church, so in the Presbyterian church just down the street, who were U.S. Army soldiers. I should explain this. During the Klondike Gold Rush, the U.S. Army comes for the third and final time to occupy the fort, and these are all African-American men, some of them former slaves. More popularly, you would know them as the Buffalo Soldiers. They, about 50 men, so 50 African-American men in Army uniforms living here in the community, and he invites them into the first congregation, the native congregation, to do music, which sounds like it would have been amazing. A white man leading musical worship service with African-American men and his native congregation all together. Meanwhile, Corser has this second Presbyterian church, which is all white people, and they are not interested in this kind of mixing. Corser complains bitterly about the quality of education in this community. And by doing that, he is openly criticizing his own superiors in the Presbyterian church. He's criticizing Sheldon Jackson, who is the most powerful man in Alaska. He is a man who can go to Washington, D.C. and see the president. I mean, Sheldon Jackson does not like to be criticized like this. Prosper Corser fully embraces native land claims. He writes about it, he talks about it. 1899 is also around the same year that the Alaska Packers Association seizes Tlingit streams and fishing grounds and literally puts fishing traps on what were long-held ancestral fishing sites, and the APA just takes it over. So this is a really big issue at the time too, just like we still talk about it today. And Harry Corser is, of course, very unhappy having to serve two segregated congregations. Not just because he believes in integration, but also because it means twice as much work. He has to do two different services. You have to do two different schools. He has to do everything twice. And it sounds like for a pastor, that's probably a lot of work and really frustrating. And so it leads to this. He came in 1899. By 1903, things are reaching ahead. He's in open conflict with his superiors inside of the church. And it comes down to service in the Presbyterian church where he addresses the congregation. I'm going to read you a quote here from Bill Taylor, who my mother met with in 1981, and he graciously let her record him. Now, he said, I have an appointment coming up. If I want it from the Episcopalian church, they said we could start a church of our own. I wonder how many people in this congregation would follow me. All those that would, I wish you'd stand up. The whole church just bounced up like a balloon. We all jumped up just like that. Nothing to it. So when that was over, Mr. Corser stood up there by the pulpit, and he couldn't talk. He just kind of mumbled, tears coming down his face like that, took his handkerchief finally and rubbed his face up just by himself, sobbed good and heavy and got it out. After that, why, he said, all right now, we have to find out a place where we can start a foundation to build a church on, and we have to raise some money. Somehow, some way to do it with. That's the beginning of this. That moment is the beginning of this. That's when pastor in front of the congregation agreed to walk out, and they walk out of the church and they form this. So the first name they give it is the People's Church. It wasn't immediately St. Philip's. It wasn't even Episcopalian. It was called the People's Church. And, you know, an interesting thing about that, and this is my extrapolation, I didn't get this from anyone in the past. I love it when people in the past give me the information I want here. I'm putting this together myself. You know, the word Tlingit, if you translate it, it means people. And so to call it the People's Church. But then not just that, you can see in these old photos right here, just like today, if we were to go out those double doors and right down the hill, we'd see this totem right here, this Kikseti totem. There's St. Philip's. Or for a time, the Kadashan totems were right over here in what is now this big lot here. There's the Kadashan totems. St. Philip's is physically close to the Tlingit village. The beginning of the village really is the Kickseti tones. I mean, that's the first family you're going to hit when you come along the bay. So the actual placement of St. Philip speaks something to its connection to this community. And I think that's something that maybe it's harder to see today because things have grown up and things about the landscape of Wrangell have changed, but the physical closeness of this church to the Klondike village would have been so obvious to anyone in the past. And you know, you look at the structure of the building, there's nothing about the exterior that really suggests that it's Klondike. It doesn't really look like a longhouse, or there's not necessarily the line art on the outside. So to know the position of the church and the relationship that way is quite powerful. I think that's something I like to call out. So they got a church. They got a church and they're out of the Presbyterian church, and it's a breakup because it's broken and it's a little awkward because not such a big town that you wouldn't see people. So it's a little tense for a few years. In 1905, the new reverend at the Presbyterian church, who's called in to replace Corser, a man named James W. Kirk, he has a proposal, and this winds up in the newspaper, the Alaska Sentinel, which was renamed to Wrangell Sentinel, so you know that. Here's his pitch to the congregation of this church. He says, I will have the Presbyterian church, manse and fencing thoroughly repaired, then carrying out the original purpose, make the old church exclusively a native church. It was organized for them. The building in part represents their labor, while to many of them, the place is endeared by not a few associates. So he's effectively suggesting, hey, I'll clean up the Presbyterian church and you can have it. And then us white congregation will move into this church you just built. Reverend Corser says no, politely declines that. He says, the natives belonging to and associated with the People's Church do not desire, nor will they entertain for a moment the proposition to leave it and go to the old church, the Presbyterian church. They are not willing to hand over the People's Church to the white people exclusively. So what I find interesting about that exchange is that even, you know, the Presbyterian reverend at the time acknowledges that, yeah, Klondike people built this Presbyterian church and they also built this church too. And so, you know, maybe we could do an exchange. Of course, there's having none of that. I think that's really wonderful and powerful that it's just in the record there that when you look at the physical footprint of Wrangell and the things that are here and the things that have been here for a long time, when you look at the Presbyterian church, you should say, oh yeah, that was created by native people. They started that. When you look at this church, you should feel that way as well. And I think that's just such a wonderful, unique thing about our community here is that not a lot of places in the Western landscape can really say that. And it's authentic here. This is a product of Wrangell's Klondike community. That's how this got here. So thankfully for the Presbyterians, they have an ace in the hole to help heal this rift. That's Tilly Paul Tannery. I pointed her out earlier as a young girl in Amanda McFarland school. She's 45 years old in 1905. She's half Klondike, half white. She grew up here in the village. Her family is the Tehiton, which are kind of halfway out on the peninsula, but she spent a lot of time growing up on Shakes Island. She was here for the bombardment of Wrangell. She remembers Claw and Talyat. She translated sermons for the Reverend S. Hall Young, and she became a missionary herself. So she is exactly the person you need to bring back in to heal this ring. So Tilly comes back, and there she is, and she's sitting next to her son, William Paul, who of course becomes a huge leader in the Alaska Native Civil Rights Movement. He's considered the father of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. He is a profoundly influential person, and he got it from his mama because she is smart and tough, and that's what brings them back here. So that's why we have stories about Tilly through the rest of her life here in Wrangell. So if you understand the Corser story, you understand a little bit more about Tilly. So she is able to bring some people back into the fold, into the Presbyterian church. But by that point, Wrangell now has an Episcopal church and a Presbyterian church even today. So in 1905, by the end of the year, Reverend Corser and his congregation joined up with the Episcopalians, thanks to a man named Bishop Peter Trimble Rowe. He is a Episcopal bishop who spends most of his time way up north. I'm talking like dog sledding north. But hearing that there's this congregation, he takes an interest in them, and they're looking for a home. As it was written in the Alaska Sentinel newspaper, he did not wish to be considered as entering the field in proselytizing opposition to the denomination that has so long held the field to itself. But when he saw that these people were determined to break away, and they had asked him for admission into the mother church, he concluded to heed their cry and take them in. This means whites and natives. And that's the nature of the conflict in the beginning, was Reverend Corser just wanted whites and natives to be able to worship together. And that's what the Alaska Sentinel really identified. Wow, they're really going to do this, okay. So from that point on, we've got an Episcopal Church, we've got a wonderful, beautiful Presbyterian church. So those are the two eras. We talked about that first American decade, it's chaotic. We talked about the Klondike and the sort of changes that come with that. From this point on, you've got Reverend Corser ministering to a largely native congregation. Here's a group of people standing in front of St. Philip's Church. If you look up here near the top, this gentleman with the bushy mustache and the white collar, that's Reverend Corser, standing around some of his parishioners. Here's a wonderful picture of Reverend Corser, and everyone's got instruments. There's some sort of band thing happening here. Reverend Corser is over here on the edge like that right there. And it's just, it's going well. A piece of the St. Philip's legacy from the early times, and I've got about 5 minutes more here to take some questions, is the St. Philip's Gymnasium. So the St. Philip's Gymnasium, which you can see through the trees right here, is this building right here. And the gymnasium was a very popular spot for not just playing sports, not just basketball, but social gatherings, weddings, events, meetings, parties, just talking and hanging out as you imagine a gymnasium would be. My experience of growing up in Wrangell, but then also going to other places like Ketchikan and Haines and all around, is that gymnasiums are where we do a lot of stuff in our communities in Southeast Alaska. We're gymnasium people. They're great gathering places. They're covered, you're not in the rain. And this is really the kind of the beginning of that part of Southeast Alaskan culture, is the gymnasium. It is the site of this beautiful home right here that the Svensons own. That's where the gymnasium was. So you just right over there, right over the fence. It really foreshadows the intensely political times that are about to happen. In the 1910s and 1920s, you've got the formation of the Alaska Native Brotherhood, Alaska Native Sisterhood. You've got William Paul suing on behalf of his community. You've got Chili Paul, Charlie Jones getting arrested for trying to vote in 1922. It's a community that's coming together and talking, and some of the early threads are running through the gymnasium. It's just people finally getting together and using their power to create their own world and choose their own destiny. And I think that's really powerful about that. Just to wind up about Reverend Corser. So Reverend Corser continues to basically be the same guy he always was. He continues to talk about native land claims, which only gets more and more important as more settlers come and take previously used native fishing areas, streams, land. Corser is opposed to the potlatch ceremony. He is not alone. There are other people who are newcomers at the time who are opposed to the potlatch ceremony as well. They think that it just leaves people poor, because in a potlatch ceremony, you give away a great amount of wealth, sort of with the intended reciprocity of it coming back to you later. But he is against it. Just want to be honest about that. Corser does publish a series of books, and I try to collect old Wrangell stuff if I can. He does a book about Alaska history, but he's most famous for Totem Lore of the Alaska Indians. Here's a copy right here, but then here's my own copy. Totem Lore of the Alaska Indians. And he acknowledges that his chief source is Kadashan, this gentleman right here, who tells him these wonderful stories. As a historian, I am desperate for voices from the past that get recorded and I can just read them off the page and I can get them. But as somebody who lives today, and I really do respect the importance of clan ownership of symbols and stories and songs, it's not the kind of thing that I think he should do today. I think if this was today, Kadashan would be the author of this book. That's what we would want to see happen. But it is nice to have some of these stories, even if it is through Corser's sort of filtered view of the world. So you can find these, by the way, this book right here, the Totem Lore, this is all online. The whole thing has been scanned and put online in libraries. You can find and read for yourself. You don't have to go on eBay and find it like that. So we'll say a little bit here, the last bit about Corser's life. It's February 1930. Reverend Corser has now been, the priest at St. Philip's for 25 years. And there's a horrible fire in the Presbyterian Church, the same exact building he walked out of 25 years before. And the fire is destroying the building, and it's February. You know how February is here. It's cold and it's icy. And so Corser comes running to put out the fire in the Presbyterian Church. And in trying to help put out the fire, he's very badly injured. He falls and gets very hurt. And this is sort of the end of it for him. He's physically deals with a lot of pain, a lot of ailments. He slows down a lot, and passes away 6 years later in 1936. It's quite clear that Tlingit people changed his life. He was a man who I think looked for his calling. Was it going to be as a teacher, as a lawyer? But as a pastor, he really excelled, and he embraced it, and he became known for these stories of the Totem Lore and the congregation that he served. I think he's an interesting example of somebody coming and being an agent for change and for good, and hopefully making the world a better place. So that's sort of the founding of St. Philip's. So I hereby, I'm going to deputize you all. You are now Church Street historians. You can do this yourself. You can take the story I just told you, and you can impress your friends and families, or, go do this for the tourists. This would be a great way to make some money. I certainly did this when I was in college. Take this story, start at Fort Wrangel. You can talk about the fort. You can talk about how crazy things were in the 1870s. And then as you walk down Church Street, you can talk about the Catholic mission that gets founded. You can talk about the Presbyterians. And then as you're walking to St. Philip's, you can be talking about Reverend Harry Corser and telling people about the founding of this community. Church Street is actually a really nice layout just on its own for as events happened. And so you can have fun with that. That's about my hour today. Thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate it. This was great fun. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm not afraid to say I don't know, but I try to find out. But is there anything I can answer for anyone in the group?
Rod and I drive a tour bus during summertime for
tourists
coming down, and I take the opposite route. I start here at the Episcopal Church and go all the way down. And by the way, there's one church that you left out. If you're supposed to go to it, I think you were asking about going to Lutheran church.
Oh, the Lutherans. I know.
It's rather new. It's 1987. So.
That would be so. I went to a Lutheran college. I hung out down at Pacific Lutheran for so long. I feel badly leaving them out. I don't know that they were around at that time. And I know the Salvation Army starts up around 1904. The Catholic Church really goes back up in 1908, 1909. So they're even Presbyterians I left out, y'all. But this was my sort of, let's get it in the can in an hour kind of version of the story.
Lutherans were really strong in the Sword Peninsula.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what happened, is that the state was divvied up into different religious missionary areas. And Lutherans got the Sword Peninsula.
That's interesting.
So they had very old historic roots there. and newer historic roots in the rest of Alaska.
So I should say this, and to credit the Lutherans as well, they're the very first Protestant church in Alaska. It's not the Presbyterians. The Presbyterians are the very first Protestant church in Alaska under the United States. It was in Sitka that Lutherans established a church because there were a lot of Finns. Finland right next to Russia. Russia brings these Finns over into Sitka, and these Finns are Lutheran Finns. And so the Lutherans have the distinction of being the first Protestant church in Alaska, which is pretty cool. Yeah, anything else?
So I'm just curious, what happened with the Methodists?
What happened with the Methodists? I know,
We
right?
had Methodist, and nobody else became Methodist. We just became Presbyterian.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's the Methodists who start this thing, and the Methodists don't really seem to get the credit, you know? Well, it's because Claw dies. I mean, I imagine a world where if Philip Claw McKay had not died and had continued to lead the church, maybe we wouldn't be talking about the Presbyterian church, we'd be talking about the Methodist church down the street. It is kind of interesting that there was this year and a half of Philip Claw McKay, and then he dies, and historically, he kind of gets shuffled into the mix and kind of get passed over. It's too bad, you know. Yeah, please.
So, Wrangell's four nations, three flags. The Tsar leased the portion of Russian America to the British, and the British had a 4-year Wrangell. Are they part of any of this story?
They're really not. So if you read Father Eiserman's book about St. Rose, he talks about during that time. So we're talking 1830s, the Russians built a fort, what is today the Marine Bar, and then 10 years later, they lease it to the British Hudson Bay Company. And so there are occasionally religious men who come through, and according to Father Eiserman, they're planting the seeds of Christianity, they're giving some presentation, they're holding the audience in rapt attention. Okay, all right. But there's no converts, there's nothing like what happens with Claw where people say, we're joining this, we're going to join up with this. A comprehensive history is in here of all the holy men who came through, but I really have to give it to Claw because nobody else is converting until Claw shows up. But that's just one man's opinion. That's how I see it. Okay. Oh, you in the back.
Can you speak to what Amanda McFarland was doing prior to coming to Wrangell?
Before Amanda McFarland came to Wrangell, she was in Idaho among the Nez Perce, ministering to the group of Indians with her husband, Mr. McFarland, who passes away. She also had a child herself who I believe passed away when the child was 7. So by the time she comes to Wrangell, she is in a point in her life where she's been through tremendous grief. And here comes Sheldon Jackson, this very short, very hyper energy guy who somehow convinces her to come with me up to Alaska to a steamship. And he drops her off after 3 days, and she's just doing this. She's just trying with Claw to minister to this congregation. She's a very interesting person. She is, her letters are online if you're interested in reading the letters of Amanda McFarland. You can read what she's writing about this place. She goes on to travel around Alaska and minister as well. But yeah, that's a little bit about Amanda McFarland.
How long did she and Claw were together?
Short time.
Short time. So he was still sort of Methodist?
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that Amanda McFarland writes about. She says, I'm trying to get them to use our hymnals and prayer books, but they want to use the Methodist books. And she's a little annoyed by that. And she's also confronting the fact that, one of the influences that the Catholic Church has is talking about confession. And so she is writing letters like, people are trying to confess to Claw, and that's not what we do. And so it's, it's a little different. People are getting used to the new tradition of Christianity. And, part of that is that they're kind of hearing things and they're borrowing from different religions. Good question. Well, this has been fun. Oh, please, yeah.
Where was Fort Simpson?
Fort Simpson. Fort Simpson is down in British Columbia. I believe the name has changed now. It's called Lac Clalan. It's an indigenous name. Scambler, do you know where Fort Simpson is?
I don't.
Okay,
It's north of Red River.
thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. I haven't been. That sounds beautiful. I know Claw is buried down there. So part of this thing that I do, I go to cemeteries a lot because I'm a cool guy and I like to have fun. And I go to cemeteries and, in Seattle, I laid forget-me-nots on one of the captains involved in the Star of Bengal because I studied this man so much. And so this is definitely on my list. I'd love to go visit Claw's burial site and just say something to the guy. That would be really, I think, pretty powerful. I would enjoy doing that. Yeah. Oh, Bonnie, yeah.
Did he start something? I heard that he started educating some 8th grade age boys that like a high school level. Does it haven't been here before?
Oh, with Reverend Corser? Yeah, Reverend Corser. So Bonnie's great question about Reverend Corser educating 8th grade boys. Yeah, so Reverend Corser is very upset at the way that Sheldon Jackson is managing education here in Wrangell when he splits off. And so, yeah, the St. Philip's Gymnasium, one of the things it hosts is a night school. And he himself had been a teacher. And so it's very easy for Corser just go right back into that groove of teaching and reaching these boys who are aged out of the educational options provided by the Presbyterian Church. And so it really actually is a recurring theme in Corser's life, even when he was for a short time a priest in Arizona, is like his thing is young men. He is always trying to be a positive influence for them. He becomes one of the first school board presidents. He Boy Scouts is something that Reverend Corser is involved with at his time here. So that's a demographic that he really tries to serve. In his obituary in the Sentinel in 1936, it talks about that's one of the chief things people will remember about this guy, is that there are a lot of young men who can say he was a positive influence in my life. So it's kind of sweet.
Just
Yeah.
for the heck of it,
Yeah.
Avie has a sweet memory from her mother that she just shared before about Corser and his
Would you like to tell it, Avie?
the watermelon party.
Oh, watermelon party.
They have a watermelon party every summer. And on that day, all the kids in Wrangell were up in school.
That's so sweet. Oh wow, that would be great. Oh, what a tradition. That's really sweet. I believe it. That's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, there's this story of church politics and everything, but Wrangell is such a small space that you got to learn to live next to that person. I don't think the way I read Corser, I think he was always annoyed with Sheldon Jackson, but he was personally fond of the Presbyterian Church. And if you read the Sentinel from those decades from 1900 to his death in 1936, Corser routinely speaks at weddings and funerals and official ceremonies alongside other clergy members. He'll speak, and then the Presbyterian pastor will speak, and then maybe someone else will speak. I mean, so he's not spending the rest of his life grinding an axe. I think he just found a way to get in the groove and just serve his congregation for the better. So yeah, good stuff. Okay. Well, I want to thank you all again for coming. This is personally a dream come true. I've so wanted to do this. I'm honored that you all came. Please enjoy your walking tours. I'll see you out there. But thank you again for coming. This is fun. Appreciate it.